Hello, everyone. Welcome to Time to Talk again, our fortnightly conversations about mediumship. I am Raf. I'm here with Guilherme. We are the co-hosts of this program. How are you doing, Guilherme?
Very well indeed. Happy to be here once again.
Very happy indeed. So, as usual, quick reminder of the groups that are behind us in this program. So both Guilherme and I, we are members of SSL, the Spiritist Society of London. It's a study group dedicated to study of Spiritist teachings. SSL is affiliated to the British Union of Spiritist Societies, BUS. BUS is a federation, the Spiritist Federation in the UK. It's behind many Spiritist initiatives here. And last one, Kardec Radio, a broadcaster for over 10 years now that offers a ton of content, like programs, podcasts, videos, audiobooks, everything is there. You name it, they have it. What do they all have in common? They are all committed with the dissemination of the Spiritist teachings. So if you're interested, go to their website, go to their Facebook pages, start following them, subscribe, so you get the notifications every time something new comes up. So, back to us. So, Guilherme, last week we were looking at the videos describing the different experiences around death. We looked at near-death experience, we talked about shared death experience, terminal lucidity, cases that can be explained by the existence of the soul or spirits. But we didn't actually tackle the question of the day, which was what happens when we die. So we're going to pick it up once again. When this question comes up, I think what happens when you die, the response that comes to your mind immediately is, I don't know. How am I supposed to know if nobody came back to tell us? Or did they? Guilherme, did anybody come back to tell us what happens when you die?
Well, I think we need to show something before we start to talking about it, because I think they did. So let's show that video first, and then we will have a conversation about it after that.
By 1850, in the United States and Europe, the phenomenon of table turning had become very popular, crowding concert halls with hundreds of spectators who wanted to see such freely flying objects up close. It was also common in private gatherings within family homes. Hippolyte Léon Denisard Rivail, a renowned French educator, initially did not pay attention to such events. Rivail considered them to be possible outcomes of some unconsciously generated physical phenomenon by the participants themselves, thus being irrelevant. But after hearing from a friend who considered himself a serious person that the objects answered questions, he became interested because he saw in this detail something worthy of research. After attending several of these meetings and reviewing dozens of past meeting records, Rivail concluded that the deep and complex answers came from outside intelligences to those who served as mediums at such meetings. It was necessary further and deeper investigations. After testing and ruling out any possibility of fraud with the mediums he would use for his research, Rivail submitted to the spirits a series of questions aimed at elucidating problems concerning the philosophy, psychology, and nature of the invisible world. Kardec formulated and tested several hypotheses in order to explain mediumistic phenomena, among them fraud, hallucinations, physical forces, somnambulism, unconscious clairvoyance, telepathy, and disembodied spirits. To reassure that the information obtained would be reliable, he used different mediums, distant and unknown to each other, for the crossing of the answers. The result of this extensive research was published in the Spirits book, April 18, 1857. It contained the principles of the Spiritist teachings on the nature of spirits, their manifestations and their relations with men, the moral laws, the present and future life, and the future of humanity, written under the dictation and published by order of superior spirits by Allan Kardec.
When questioned about its nature, this force has declared itself to belong to the world of spirit beings who have divested themselves of the human corporeal envelope. In this way, the doctrine of the spirits has been revealed.
Right. I think just before you dive in, Guilherme, let me just say thank you to the Spiritist Academy. They have a lot of materials online in a very easy to understand way that explains the principles behind Spiritism. And I also want to remind everyone to please drop your comments or your notes in the comments box. We will try to say hello to you and address your questions live. Anyways, back to you, Guilherme.
Well, first comment is that the French accent on the end of the video, superb, very nice. And well, what can we say? Yes, they did come back to say, or if they didn't, there's a lot of people needing medical attention, because we are millions and millions that believe in spirits, participate in meetings, study Allan Kardec in depth. There must be something true behind all of it. And the most important thing is that Kardec, he was brilliant in his time. If you do have a time to research about his career path, even before he put himself as Allan Kardec for the Spiritism world, you will see he was brilliant. He was a scientist. He was part of Sorbonne Academy and a few other things. So he was brilliant on his time. And one of the things he did was a thorough research. That video shows a bit how he thinks, but his research was in depth to every single aspect. Because we know there are things that are not true either. So he had to check and check again and verify again to be able to produce what he did. What I would like to start our conversation to explain that they came back to tell us a bit more is we always know they came back because it is written through civilizations over the ages, communications from where, from whom. So there are something beyond what we can see. So in the future, we're going to be speaking about the subject. You want to say something, Harp? I think you are on mute, Rafael.
That is a classic live issue, right? Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yes. I think there's even on that, the comments were just saying that if we look back and start to researching a bit what happened, what they call back then in like the 1850s, the turning tables or dancing tables or tipping tables, they reached a point where they first understood that maybe it was caused by magnetic or some sort of force. But then once they started developing ways of asking questions to these objects and receiving an intelligent answer, then that's when something else changed, because if there's an effect that is intelligent, there must be a cause that's intelligent behind that. And I think the first thing that I think in the video mentioned that they thought, or maybe it's somehow the mediums or the people in the rooms, that it was some sort of, it was their intelligence somehow being transferred or being used. But then as they started to investigate, a bit more, and were able to put in place ways of getting the messages out of the objects, let's say, then you realize that the answers that were coming from the objects were actually not within the understanding, the knowledge that the people in that room had. So in that point, you were mentioning about Kardec and how brilliant he was, apart from even before anything related to Spiritism. But in that, Kardec was also an investigator. He was an educator in France. And in that point, I think that's when the thing got serious, because there was a better investigation to have in terms of what was actually happening there, what was behind those things. And I think that's when we started to see a scientific investigation behind those phenomena.
Yeah. The scientific part of it create a method. And this method was used to ensure that any information he was disclosing on the end has been thoroughly exhausted, exercised, tested, researched, verified. So it was not something like he taught and put on a paper and that's it. He spent a lot of time with a lot of people, as you saw, that didn't even know each other at the time. They didn't know each other at the time. So there was a way to prove there was something intelligent behind those table turnings or tipping tables, as you said, right? But that was the beginning, right? After that event, that was happening a lot in the States, England, and most of France. They had to develop a method to speed up the way of communications. Otherwise, that would be lengthy and exhausting. Because imagine having a phrase, only people knocking or a table knocking, or they wouldn't be able to continue like that. So he started to contact mediums, and through the development process, there was turning tables. He found there were some types of mediums that could listen, see, and write. I will speak about those three first, right? Well, so the medium that hear spirits, right? They can hear spirits through more than one way. To be easy to understand, through the normal ears, or through a thought that comes straight to the mind. It's a way, simple way to explain that. They have mediums that write. Well, how does it work? You know, mediums work through the perispirits. But I'm not going on that path. That's just to mention that is something that allows that to happen, right? But the mediums that write the message from beyond, from the other side. And we have mediums that can hear. We have mediums that can write. We have mediums that can speak. So you could have a conversation with the medium like we are having here, me and Rafael. And there's another one that I think is important to mention right now, is the intuition that people say, medium, intellectual medium, those that have received information through their thoughts or when they're sleeping or whatever, and they act upon. So based on those four principal type of mediumship, Kardec was able to elaborate this tremendous work he did, at least for us, right? So, but that was the beginning. Yep.
No, just when you were just describing some of the types of mediums that exist, just at the very end of the movie, it mentions that. So when Kardec started this investigation from a scientific using a scientific method, and that he got the same answers, that actually there were spirits using the mediums, and let's say using the energy that the mediums make it available, exert in the environment, in a very simplistic way. to communicate. But in the end, I think that the key principle was they were spirits that of people that had lived in this plane before, and the fact that he was using mediums in different places to ask the same questions, to validate the answers, that in the end he compiled into these books, the 5 books are the base of Spiritism. I think the important hook is it's not his doctrine, it's not his opinion, it's a spirit's opinion. It's the message that the spirits gave to us. It isn't invented by Kardec or Kardec's assessment of things. It was the message that he actually received from the others. And to be honest, I think that's a very, very important point of clarification about this program, to be very honest. Because we came here, look, in the first episode we said we don't have the answers. We will try to find the answers, come back, ask questions, but let's learn together. But the point being, we will always go back to Spiritist teachings. We will go back to the books that Kardec compiled, the message that he received from the spirits, to base our answers, to base our reflections. So it won't be just a matter of, oh, this is how I think. No, let's go back and understand what did the spirits taught us on that matter. And specifically about mediumship, which was the very core. It was what allowed us to receive all of this information. Guilherme was mentioning a few examples of mediums that are out there, but in the book, the mediums book, there's just pretty much the description of all kinds of mediums, at least that we had knowledge of back then. So I'd highly recommend people to have a look on that one.
If I could make a brief description of how that happened. There was a scientist behind a method that applied what we call universality of Spiritist teachings. That means we had spirits all over the world answering the same question. That question was compared and then compiled by Kardec. So that's very brief description of how his mindset was planning to do things, and he managed to do what we still sometimes having a hard time to study and to understand, because he was so in depth in some aspects, and sometimes we have a hard time to understand still today. And some of things that he brought, even science is only able to catching up now. So, but that's something else, right? But I would like to mention as well, Rafael. But yeah, carry on.
No, go. What are you going to mention?
Spiritism started before Kardec accepted to be part of it, right? Spiritism is a consequence of a movement that was happening in society, in England, in US, in France. The philosophers, they were pretty much more into spiritualism at the time. There was not such a between the philosophers and what we call spiritualism. Later on, that happened. The materialism, that was a different thing. But in the beginning, especially in France, that was a movement that they call rational spiritualism. That people like Mendes and between other names, that's one of the names that came now. And they create, and by the way, people that wants to read about Biran, they can go into Bibliothèque Nationale de France and find his books from that time.
What was behind that? What was behind that rational spiritualism?
They've started to analyze spiritualism in depth, bringing that knowledge into society, trying to understand how things that were in theory unknown could be part of society. And that create a perfect scenario to allow Kardec to start his work.
So would you say that the French rational spiritualism set the base, the kind of spiritism kind of built up on top based on how they were investigating things already?
Yes. There's a recent study that talk about that and talk quite a lot with a lot of in-depth research and material to support that. And I believe somewhere along the line, same process was happening in UK, in US, but in France, Kardec was there. And then they end up doing the Spiritism as we know, right? So I think that we need to understand that even Kardec was told if he was not prepared to accept his task, there were other people that would be able to do it. So somewhere along the line, we would receive the same information.
Okay. Right. I think let me just so we don't end up doing the same thing as last week, which is not addressing the question. Let me try to pull us back. With that background that we just gave in terms of where we're getting the answers from, what was behind Spiritism, and how mediumship was at the very center of how Spiritism came into place. What happens when we die? And I think before I said that, how am I supposed to know if no one came back to tell us? But now that we know that people came back to tell us through the mediums, that the question is different, right? It's a different perspective. The question is, who succeeded in coming back to tell us? Who succeeded to come back to tell us, Guilherme?
Well, for us Brazilians, that we are very familiar with a lot of names from our country originally, and some very important names from abroad as well. We could mention a lot of names, but I'll pick two names: Reverend George Owen and André Luiz, through Francisco Cândido Xavier psychography. Why I'm picking two? Because those two guys, André Luiz and George Owen, they brought approximately the same type of information, different countries, different time, and I believe perhaps if we go to really do a research around the world, maybe there are others, but I don't know. So I would like to first introduce André Luiz, because it will be easier for me. And he brought several books through Chico Xavier. But the series that are, in my opinion, what I call a scientific compendium, had 13 books. Some of them are more like a romance with a lot of information inside, and some of them are more scientific, in-depth books.
Let me stop you there before you move on, because I want to talk about these books as well. So I only read these books from André Luiz maybe probably like around 5 years ago. I think I've studied and I've heard about them and the cases on them a lot, but I only stopped to read all of them about 5 years ago. And the best way I think I would use to describe is what you said. I think it's written in a way that's pretty much a novel, where André Luiz comes back to us, as Guilherme said, and he uses Chico Xavier as a famous medium to write these books about André Luiz's experience on the other side, and the text, the script is just so easy to follow, because it really brings us to a very day-to-day life understanding, but from the other side, the perspective of how things on the other side are happening, helping, interacting with us, and so on. And I think the first book, which is Astral City, it starts with André Luiz describing to us what he went through when he passed in his previous life, it pretty much gives us a detailed understanding of, on the other side, when he found himself on that side, what was around him, what was he feeling, what challenges he had. That is a book that I would 100% recommend to anyone interested in understanding a bit more of what happens when we die. I know Guilherme is itching to get to a more technical side of it, so I'm going to give it to him as well. Go, Guilherme.
Before I start that part, I would like to say something. In another institution, I'm part of a study of those books from André Luiz. And we started this study saying that this study is to prepare us to die better. Why I'm saying that?
That's a nice way of putting it.
Because there is a lot of information over there. Really, really a lot of information that worth to read. And I can tell you something. Every time we read, we find something else. That means that first read, perhaps we don't pay much attention. Second one, we find things that are different. And every time we read ourselves or through a group of study, is amazing. I would vouch for it. If you have the opportunity to study or to read, I would not waste that opportunity. But let us go now for one topic, that what happens when we die. There is something very, very specific in one of André Luiz's books. Can you show the presentation? Yeah, I'll read through, and in the end, we're going to have a quick word about it. What is histogenesis? In the pupal position, at the impact of the vibrations of its own in the psychomatic organization, it undergoes essential modification in its organism. A modification which, at bottom, is equivalent to a veritable annihilation of histolysis at the same time as it elaborates new organs by the phenomenon of histogenesis, making use of the tissues which have survived. Before we move to the next slide, this is André Luiz explaining the histogenesis of insects, right? He had to use that expression, that way of make us think, to understand what he brought us later. So can we move to the next one, please? What is spiritual histogenesis? In the cycle of cadaverization of the somatic form, our body, under the dynamic government of its spiritual body, our perispirit, it undergoes extreme alterations which, in a sense, correspond to the histolysis of the physical cells, pretty much the same as happens with insects. At the same time as it elaborates new organs by the phenomenon which we may name, for the lack of equivalent term, as spiritual histogenesis, taking advantage of the living elements disintegrated from the cytoplasmic tissues and which until then remained connected to their physiological hive given over imbalance of the composition. So basically, we start to figure out that when we die, something happens, right? Continuing, through spiritual histogenesis, the cytoplasmic tissues are definitely rid of some characteristics which are their own, temporarily returning, as if attending to an involuntary process, to the condition of multiform embryonic cells which divide themselves through karyokinesis, forming in new conditions the form of a spiritual body according to the type imposed by the mind. So we have here information that is pretty interesting. And I'm pretty sure that a lot of people that used to read his books sometimes don't even catch what is written there.
Yeah, I want to make a comment here about this because I think it's worth sharing that. Look, this is to be very honest, is a very not scientific or I don't know, technical, let's say, wording. And we will explain a bit more on this one. We just brought it as a note or a quote. And there's another slide with a bit more. But I think I want to highlight that André Luiz, in his previous life, before he was sending these messages and these books to us, he was actually a doctor. And he can speak with a lot of confidence about the biological elements, let's say, that connect the body and the spirit, and I think the reflections of the spiritual side on the body and how the body functions. So that's that. If you have that curiosity, let's say, in terms of understand a bit better in detail how that works, you can find that also in André Luiz books. But there are a lot of other books that focus on the novel side, which is a bit more on the day-to-day reality. So don't be scared by this terminology here. Guilherme, you're laughing. Okay, tell me to pass another one.
Yes, please.
I just saw a comment here. Vera is saying it's quite difficult to understand. I agree, Vera. I think it's quite difficult to understand as well. We're going to try to explain.
So, in the same way as the larvae feed themselves, thus ensuring the expected metamorphosis, the soul advances in experience while in the carnal body, acquiring merits or demerits according to its own conduct, and then surrendering itself. It is in this way that the soul, in the phenomenon of death or histolysis of the physical body, takes an indispensable pause in its own activities or a hiatus, and it is re-established, which may be long or short, in order to reappear. Pay attention to this part, because this will be, we will speak about that in the next part of the program. Through spiritual histogenesis, in possession of new organs and implements necessary for the new field of action, and to remain there for as long as it can keep up with the knowledge it has acquired in its human journey. Well, let's try to bring that now to simple words.
Please.
Yeah. Please, yeah.
And also, let me just say, Vera made a comment about being difficult to understand. Vera, if you have questions, put the questions in.
Vera, first, before I explain a little bit what is it, I was born in the Spiritist family. First time I had the pleasure to read André Luiz books, I probably had 14 years old. That was the time when I started reading. And I'm still learning. I'm still finding new things. But we hear a lot. Oh, this book is very complicated. Evolution in Two Worlds. That creates like a mantra. It's too difficult. Don't go that far. Don't think about it. And everyone can. It's a bit more difficult? Yes, it is. But we can always move an additional mile, and then things will get easier. Perhaps not the first time we read, but as a continuous process, we all can overcome that. But going back to trying to explain that in simple words, what André Luiz was trying to say is, when we die, the moment that our body starts to disintegrate is the process called cadaverization, means when there is no life controlled by our spirits in the body anymore. At that time, through a physical and chemical process, we start to create organs, a body, to allow us as spirits to interact in the spiritual realm. Well, but don't we have the perispirits? Well, I'm not the one saying that. Is André Luiz through Francisco Cândido Xavier saying that. And it does explain a lot if you decide to dig a bit deeper, but not going that way, not now, right? What we need to understand for all that he's saying is that when we die, there is a law that happens to us that create organs. And when you create an organ, you're creating a body that allow us as spirits to interact in the spiritual world. Simple to understand if you put it that way. If you start to use scientific words, you start to say that when the cell divided, when things are, forget about the scientific, at least here. We can go deeper in the future. What we need to understand is that we need to study. There's a lot of information on his books and elsewhere, but I love his books, by the way, that give us a different perception of what happened when we die.
Let me step in. Let me step in because, like Vera, I had to read this. And by the way, this is in the book of Evolution to Worlds from André Luiz. I had to read the chapter. I think it was chapter 13 and 12 a couple of times.
Yeah.
It was actually more like 5 times until I started to absorb a bit more. Anyways, I think the way I understood, Guilherme, you correct me if I'm wrong. First of all, what happens when you die? I think we can look at this from 2 perspectives. One perspective, which is the one we are looking at the moment, is from the morphological way. Morphology means just format, in a simple term. So from the format, let's call it, of the spirit, Guilherme was mentioning before that there is something called the spiritual body and so on. From that perspective, this explanation from André Luiz, it makes it clear that in the moment, I think a good parallel for me, what helped to understand was I was doing like a parallel to understand that's pretty much like a what do you call it, muscle memory. Like muscle memory, or when you are in autopilot. Our brain is 100% of the time running a mechanical system, which is our body. So our brain right now is running this mechanical system, is managing my systems, managing my blood vessels, managing everything, the chemical reactions in my blood. My brain is doing that automatically right now. Our soul, which is the source of thoughts, which is the powers, the part of the brain that's also monitoring, controlling that mechanical functioning of my body. When we die, when the body stops working, my mind still has that element of managing the body going on. So let's say that let's call it a spiritual mind, spiritual brain. The spiritual brain, the moment that the body stops functioning, is still making it work, right? So automatically, it generates a replica of our body or how our body was functioning. And they will use part of our last energy resources from our physical body to create that or to form that, let's say.
Rafael.
I quite like. Wait, Guilherme. Wait. I don't think that's easier to understand, to be honest. But it kind of helps illustrate a bit more. I like the parallel with the metamorphosis example, like a butterfly, like a caterpillar that gathers all of the nutrients and energy that it needs, goes into the cocoon, transforms into a cocoon, and once the whole process of transformation inside is finished and it doesn't get anything else from the cocoon, it doesn't need anything else because the cocoon cannot give anything else to the butterfly. It then becomes a butterfly and leaves the cocoon behind to live its full self. There's a beauty in the parallel between the moment of the disconnection of the soul from the body, and that metamorphosis when the butterfly leaves the cocoon. It was another way for me to understand a bit how this worked. Go, Guilherme.
You are entirely right. That's why André Luiz used an insect process, known by science, to try to make us understand. And bear in mind that this information has been given to us 1952 or 53, I think, around that time.
Yeah.
So we're still trying to catching up that level of information, just to give an idea how Spiritism is ahead of the time sometimes. And you know that by now, a lot of people are saying that we are not normal, right? That we are a bit problematic. But
who isn't?
Exactly. But there's one thing that I would like to propose everyone.
Okay.
Break your boundaries. What was true 100 years ago through science, through goodwill, have changed. Look at the news today. They just put on the news today a picture of a black hole swallowing 6 Milky Ways. Is there science? 100 years ago, that would not be possible. And even on the Spiritism, we do have enough information that people decide not to go in depth. That today, we do have better means to understand, and we can exercise that. So before we say that, no, that does not exist, think, let's stick together, let's have questions, let's have doubt. It's wonderful if you have doubts. But just to give an idea to the people that are listening to us, the medium who wrote that part, he could not have that level of education. That information came from somewhere. And that information does make sense if we start to compare other informations through André Luiz books and other books related. It's a bit of hard work. Yes, it is. But if we do not put ourselves forward to learn something, to try to understand something, nothing is easy. There's no easy way to learn something.
That's a good point. You just I was reading when I was preparing for today. I didn't realize that Chico Xavier, which was the medium who wrote the book, receiving from the messages from André Luiz, he only finished I think he did only 4th grade. He only finished his primary studies. He didn't have the knowledge to explain with those words and with those examples these phenomena. Just as a curiosity.
Just a comment. Those 13 books from André Luiz, he has more than that, but those 13 had 2 mediums, Chico Xavier and Valdo Vieira. Most of them Chico Xavier, right? So I think you have a lot to dig into if you want to, but it does answer one part of the original question: what happens when we die? Right? We can evolve, and we will in the future, but that's one way to see things.
That's what I was going to say. So I was trying to summarize from the morphology perspective. I think that explains or tries to explain. I don't know if we understand fully, but it explains what happens. But there is another perspective, which I think it's as important as, which is the consciousness perspective. And again, I can easily go back to André Luiz, and we were talking about the many books that he wrote about the experience. First of all, his own experience of what he went through when he died, and the multiple cases that he accompanied throughout his journey. And from a consciousness perspective, I think first of all that we need to just have in mind that there are no rules in terms of, oh, this is how it happens for everyone. There are no rules. It depends on a series of items, a series of elements. But anyways, the examples that André Luiz shares with us, he shares a lot of examples. There's a commonality to it. Usually, people have somebody they know that will receive them, will be there to receive them on the other side, either a friend or a family member or multiple friends or family members. There's also a description of something that reminds people of hospitals, pretty much a place where they are received to help their transition, to help them understand their new reality. But those items, they depend not only on that structure being on the other side, they depend mostly on, and it goes back to what Guilherme was saying in the course that he was doing, it goes back to how our understanding, our preparation for the transitioning. So there's a merit side, first of all. Did we develop and keep enough good relationships so that people will want to help us when it's time for us to transition? And second of all, do we understand what's going to happen? Are we prepared to understand, oh, this is happening, that was my body life, now my spirit, I'm going on? Those things will play a huge part on that transition. If our mind in autopilot has the ability to generate this spiritual body automatically when we are passing, imagine what the confusion that it might generate in terms of ideas when you pass and you're not prepared. You don't understand what's happening. You thought you would die and it would be it, and then you see yourself alive. Oh, well, I'm supposed to be dead, but I'm still here. I'm still thinking. I'm still alive. I'm still. What's going on? So imagine the confusion that it would be in people's minds.
And Rafael, that when we are part of a mediumship meetings, from time to time there are spirits that come to talk to us, and they are from different religion, from different part of the world, and they've been taught that when we die, we sleep forever until one day we all be together in heaven. Sometimes it's hard to explain them because they've been taught things that now they see is a bit different. But that we all gonna, to a certain extent, we all will learn different things when that happen to us. But we can prepare ourselves to minimize the impact. I think that's the best way to put it. And when we were talking a little bit before, I start laughing here because I think, my God, we need to talk about spiritual bodies. Because even a lot of spiritists, they think that a spirit is a balloon full of gas with a brain inside that you can release and fly everywhere.
No
imagine, exactly. Imagine around the world what people may think, right? But if you want to go deeper with that, and I think we should in the future, we have to have an agreement between us. We need to study the matter, and we need to be open to listen first and to consider different information that is already available to us. For example, this one since 1953. Why we have ignored that for so long. So now it's time. Now it's time. That's our goal.
It's a good point, because I think we received last week a question in our forum, which, by the way, I'm going to put the QR code, and the link is in our description for the episode. So if you think about a question afterwards, you can just send it straight to us using the form. If you're not comfortable in sharing the questions and comments, just send us in an anonymous way, and then we will address it. Anyway,
Rafael, just one thing before you go. I cannot see how many people are there watching or not. If they do not have questions, I'll be very surprised. Very surprised.
True. I have questions, but I would like to answer other people's questions, not only mine. Anyways, let me take a look. Let me put it here, the question you received last week. which kind of ties back quite nicely with what we were talking about, the transition, right? How smooth it is to wake up on the other side from a consciousness perspective. Anyways, here's the question. Do we know how long does the spirit stay on earth before going to the spiritual world? Does it depend on each circumstance? For example, whether they have accepted death. Can some spirits stay on earth for a long time? I'll give you this stage.
Well, only 10 minutes? Well, let's talk first about spiritual world. I have a surprise to you, to all of you. We are in the spiritual world. Oh dear, now they think I'm really crazy. No, I'm not. We are in the spiritual world, but we are using, at this moment, our physical body. The spiritual world is intermeshing, crossing with what we call our world. So the spirit that is beside me here, he is on the spiritual world, but he's closer to me. So we need to understand that on the spiritual world, we have, let's say, to better understand, different levels. But it is always spiritual world. What will define where the spirit will be is his vibration. His vibration is the consequence of what he chose to be, what he did, the good things he did, or the bad things he did. The amount of people he helped, or the amount of people he decided not to help. This basically defines our vibration. And through our vibration, we are kind of invited to the right place where we must be. Why I'm saying like that? Because if I decide not to do good, not to evolve, the place that I may end up with, I don't want to describe here. It's not nice, right? So that's just to give a glance of what is the spiritual world. Because sometimes we think the spiritual world is very, very far from where we are, and it is not true. Well, how long? Yeah.
I just like to say I like this question came with an answer, to be honest, which is and I didn't even think about when I was talking before about, let's always have in mind that there are no rules in relation to whatever I go through, the same person has to go through as well. It's not quite like that. It will be dependent on a series of elements that we were talking about, right? It will be dependent on how you lived your life, how prepared you are in terms of understanding the things you're going to go through, good deeds that you have, the helping hands that will be on the other side waiting for you, the enemies that you might have left behind. So there's a lot of elements. So I quite like that they asked the question and they already said, does it depend on each circumstance? It does. I know here they specifically saying whether they have accepted death or not. And Guilherme was explaining, giving an example where we have cases that people that they just don't understand. It's not about accepting death or not. They just don't understand. They cannot be dead because they are still living. They're still seeing things and thinking and feeling things. So it's not as much of an acceptance. It's confusion in many cases. And I have to go back to André Luiz, and I would highly recommend whoever wrote this question to have a very easy read, starting from Astral City, and then you go on your way through the other books, because it's really enlightening in understanding what people go through. Because as a consequence, look, again, there's no they have to go through because it's their punishment. No, it's as a consequence of how they lived their lives and how prepared they were for that moment. Yeah, go.
There's something about acceptance. Eventually, when we die, we'll have to accept. There's no other way around. We have to accept. Can that define the time we'll stay here or there? Yes, it can. It can. I will give here some examples that I have experienced myself through the years I was part of mediumship meetings. One day, through the meeting, one spirit was crying. He was crying a lot. And we managed to give him some comfort enough to allow him to talk with us. And he started to describe where he was. And through his explanation, became clear to the person who was having the conversation with the spirit that he was yet linked to the time where slavery was a common practice. So he was yet attached to that time, suffering as he was there at that time for more than 100 years. It was very difficult, and was not only a single conversation, single meeting that was able to help him. So that's one example. We had another example. There was a spirit that was very, very tough. He was arguing a lot of things. He was not happy to be there. And he made a symbol that was easy to us to identify. He was killed or he died. We never went that deep to ask how things happened with him. But he was part of the Nazi campaign in Europe. And he was there. To him, the war was there yet. When we said, my brother, the war is over. No, you lying. I was fighting yesterday. I was killing yesterday. So time is something that may change a lot depending on our perception. Talking about timing, I can see that time is going away through our fingers. So it's better to hurry up.
I think we can extend another 5 minutes because there are a couple of questions I wanted to read from the group.
I will just wrapping up this one here and we go for the questions. Otherwise, it'll be too long. So what I would suggest, same as I did in the study I've started a couple of years ago, we need to prepare ourselves to die. André Luiz is a wonderful way, a simple way to start to understand how the process works. Because if you do understand how the process works, chances are that we will minimize the time that we need to get used to our new clothes, our new bodies, our new life. So I would recommend people, as Rafael did 2 minutes ago, Astral City to start with. Pay attention. Water, food, houses. Pay attention on details. Don't read on hurry. Read slowly. And then you have lots of questions. Shall we go to questions?
Let's try. I think the first one is from Faye when we were talking about the different elements that influence the way your transition is when you die. And she was asking about, are we saying that people are in tune with the social groups or the kinds of spirits, good or not? whatever they may be, if it materialized or not. And I think a quick way to say this is, and I have the conversation with my friends as well, it's the friends you have in life. What is the reason why you spend your time with a group of friends that you spend your time with? It's the things you have in common. It might be hobbies that you have in common. It might be things that you share, experiences that you go through. You work together for many years in the same place. You went to uni together, went to school together, whatever it is. There's always something in common. And from a spiritual perspective, that's the same thing. I think the spirits will be connected to you and closer to you and develop relationships with you, and a proximity or not, based on the things they have in common. If you have more positive things for others to identify with and have in common, then you have probably a more positive circle of spiritual friends and companions. If it's more on the other side, same thing. The spirits that have the same, I think, negative commonalities will get closer to you and be part of your group. So yes, I would say yes. People are in tune with the social groups that they are, and those are the ones that once you passed will be on the other side to receive you. Might help you, or they might not help you. That's all I have to say. I don't want to scare anyone.
Just add one little thing, because I enjoyed pretty much your answer. Whoever we choose to be defines our friends, as Rafael said. Who are our friends? Incarnated spirits. Also defines the spirits even when we are alive. Whoever we decide to be, we choose to be, defines our friends on flesh and bones and in spirits. So we cannot complain. We choose our friends in both ways.
Yeah. Just conscious of time, I'm going to read the last question from Vera, and I don't know if this is going to be a quick answer, but we'll try. The question is because I was talking about the not seeing things as a punishment, but more as a consequence, a reflection of how we live our lives, how we prepare ourselves for the passing and so on. And Vera asked, how should I overcome the feeling of being punished by life?
This is very interesting because through our study earlier today, we spoke about it, right? We have the freedom, the free will to define what we are, who we are, right? Understanding that we have multiple lives, what we are today is a consequence, what we choose to be in this life or before. So we are not punished at all. These consequences, they are consequences of what we choose to be. And we are not punished because God does not punish anyone. He don't want to punish anyone. But if we decide to go in a path that the result is pain, he also respects our free will. Sometimes it's hard to understand, sometimes you don't want to understand because we don't like to feel pain. But as you said, time constraints may not allow us to go in depth in this question. But
sorry, Guilherme. That question. No, close, Guilherme. You're going to say. Sorry.
Look around you. If you think you are in pretty bad shape, being punished, or you do not deserve what is happening in your life, we are using internet, through a computer, through a cell phone. There are lots of people that have nothing to eat, as we are here. does not fix your problem, but will create you possibly a different way of thinking.
I'm gonna just say 1 minute and then I'm gonna close because we're 5 minutes already in. And I quite like the Guilherme's last comment. I try to get practical notes from the reflections and studies that we do. And Vera, to be honest, is the exercise we're talking about. It's to change yourselves to become better. Is a daily exercise, a daily effort. It's not, oh, I heard about this or I studied this, and therefore now I'm good, I'm done. No, it will be day after day. Every time you find yourself kind of feeling particularly bad towards a situation, or feeling as a victim or something, or not feeling well about the situation that you have to go through, identify that you are having that feeling and try to look at it from a different perspective. Guilherme gave a good example. Try to look, I know of so many people that are on worse situation than I am. That should be enough to kind of help me get out of that mental zone, the mental area. Or what are the things around this situation that I need to learn, that I need to do to change? Because if I go through suffering or complaining, but I don't want to stop to think about and understand what should I be taking out of this moment of pain, then it might be in vain. And it is hard. It's not going to be easy. And there's no recipe again to overcome anything. It's effort and work day after day. But with that, I'm going to close because we can go on and on about this one, to be honest. And I want to say thank you to everyone about the comments and participation. That was really good. And I'm going to leave the comments open a little while with the titles also in the last slide for you to take a look on the references that we used. And again, if you want to send messages, send through the form. We will be happy to address them next week. Thank you very much. It's been a great time to talk, and I'll see you in 2 weeks. Ciao,
Thank you
Guilherme.
all. Thanks a lot. Ciao, Rafael.